The Tetragrammaton is the Hebrew theonym, commonly transliterated into Latin letters as YHWH. It is one of the names of God used in the Hebrew Bible. The name may be derived from a verb that means to be, to exist, to cause, to become, or to come to pass. The books of the Torah and the rest of the Hebrew Bible contain the Hebrew word. Religiously observant Jews and those who follow conservative Jewish traditions do not pronounce either aloud or to themselves in silence, nor do they read aloud transliterated forms such as Yahweh or YHWH. Instead, the word is substituted with a different term, whether used to address or to refer to the God of Israel. Common substitutions for Hebrew forms are HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Adonai, or Hashem. Origins. Etymology. The letters, properly read from right to left, are. The name YHWH is probably derived from the Hebrew triconsonantal root to be, become, come to pass, with a third-person masculine Y prefix, equivalent to English he. It is connected to the passage in Exodus chapter 3 verse 14 in which God gives his name as, where the verb, translated most basically as I am that I am, or I shall be what I shall be, I shall be what I am, or I will become what I choose to become, I will become whatsoever I please. With the vocalization, Yahweh could theoretically be a Hifi verb inflection of root HWH, with a meaning something like, he who causes to exist, or who gives life. As a Kal verb inflection, it could mean he who is, who exists. Pronunciation. The most widely accepted pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton is Yahweh. Gilbert Genebrod suggested the pronunciation Jev based on Theodore's assertion that the Samaritans used the pronunciation Iabe. For most Jews, however, it was forbidden to pronounce, or even write in full, the Tetragrammaton. Lukin Williams proposed the pronunciations of the Tetragrammaton to be Yahweh or YHWH based on theophoric names in the Hebrew Bible that end in YHW. Tiberian's vocalization. Vowel Points. The original consonantal text of the Hebrew Bible was, several centuries later, provided with vowel marks by the Masoretes to assist reading. In places that the consonants of the text to be read differed from the consonants of the written text, they wrote the ker in the margin as a note showing what was to be read. In such a case the vowels of the ker were written on the ketiv. For a few frequent words, the marginal note was omitted. These are called ker perpetuum. One of the frequent cases was the Tetragrammaton, which according to later Jewish practices should not be pronounced but read as Adonai, or, if the previous so next word already was Adonai, as Elohim. The combination produces and respectively non-words that would spell YHWH and YHWH respectively. The oldest complete or nearly complete manuscripts of the Masoretic text with Tiberian's vocalization, such as the Aleppo Codex and the Leningrad Codex, both of the 10th or 11th century, mostly write with no pointing on the first H. It could be because the O diacritic point plays no useful role in distinguishing between Adonai and Elohim and so is redundant. Or it could point to the ker being sh marked, which is Aramaic for the name. Consonantal semivowels in ancient Hebrew. The letter, known to modern Hebrew speakers as Vav, was a semivowel with rather than et v. The letter is referred to as WAW in the academic world, and accordingly is represented in English academic texts as YHWH. In unpointed biblical Hebrew, most vowels are not written and the rest are written only ambiguously, as certain consonants can double as vowel markers. These are referred to as matters lectionized. For similar reasons, an appearance of the Tetragrammaton in ancient Egyptian records of the 13th century BCE sheds no light on the original pronunciation. Therefore, it is, in general, difficult to deduce how a word is pronounced only from its spelling, and the Tetragrammaton is a particular example. 2 of its letters can serve as vowels, and 2 are vocalic placeholders, which are not pronounced. Thus, the first-century Jewish historian and philosopher Josephus said that the sacred name of God consists of 4 vowels. This difficulty occurs somewhat also in Greek when transcribing Hebrew words because of Greek's lack of a letter for consonant y and of a letter for w, forcing the Hebrew consonants yod and waw to be transcribed into Greek as vowels. Also, non-initial h caused difficulty for Greeks and was liable to be omitted. Chi was pronounced as k plus h, and could not be used to represent h, as in modern Greek chi alpha rho rho iota equals Harry. For example, Adonai. The vocalizations of and are not identical. The schwa in YHWH and the hataf patik in DNY appear different. The vocalization can be attributed to biblical Hebrew phonology, where the hataf patik is grammatically identical to a schwa, always replacing every schwana under a guttural letter, since the first letter of is a guttural letter while the first letter of is not. The hataf patik under the aleph reverts to a regular schwa under the yod. The table below considers the vowel points for and, respectively. Note in the table directly above that the simple shawa in Yehowa and the hataf patik in Adonai are not the same vowel. The same information is displayed in the table above and to the right, where YHWH intended to be pronounced as Adonai and Adnai, with its slightly different vowel points shown to have different vowel points. Jehovah, Jehovah, D-H-O-V-E, is a Latinization of the Hebrew, a vocalization of the Tetragrammaton. Most scholars believe that Jehovah to be a late hybrid form derived by combining the Latin letters YHWH with the vowels of Adonai, but there is some evidence that it may already have been in use in late antiquity. Other scholars believe that Jehovah is the correct pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton, which is pronounced as it is written. Jehovah was popularized in the English-speaking world by William Tyndale and other pioneer English Protestant translations such as the Geneva Bible and the King James Version, and is still used in the New World Translation. However, it is no longer used in most mainstream English translations, with Lord or Lord usually used instead, generally indicating that the corresponding Hebrew is YHWH. Yehowa, Yahweh. The Hebrew scholar Wilhelm Gesenius suggested that the Hebrew punctuation, which is transliterated into English as Yahweh, might more accurately represent the pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton than the biblical Hebrew punctuation, from which the English name Jehovah has been derived. His proposal to read YHWH as was based in large part on various Greek transcriptions, such as iota, alpha, beta, epsilon, dating from the 1st centuries CE, but also on the forms of theophoric names. In his Hebrew dictionary, Gesenius supports Yahweh because of the Samaritan pronunciation iota, alpha, beta, epsilon reported by Theodore, and that the theophoric name prefixes YHW and YH can be explained from the form Yahweh. Today, many scholars accept Gesenius's proposal to read YHWH as. Gesenius's proposal gradually became accepted as the best scholarly reconstructed vocalized Hebrew spelling of the Tetragrammaton. Yahuwah. Others hold to the trisyllable of the name, how he hacked in the Tanakh. Max Razel about wrote in 1957, the vocalization of the Tetragrammatons originally Yahuwah have been. In the archaic biblical Hebrew, the W is not spoken. Theophoric names. Yehowah is the prefix form of YHWH used in Hebrew theophoric names. The suffix form Yahu or Yehu is just as common, which has caused two opinions. In former times, the prefix pronunciation Yeho was sometimes connected with the full pronunciation Yehovah, derived from combining the Masoretic vowel points for Adonai with the consonantal Tetragrammaton YHWH. Recently, as Yahweh is likely an imperfective verb form, Yahu is its corresponding preterite of short form. Compare Yestahawa, Yestahu equals duobasence. The first argument one is believed by George Wesley Buchanan in Biblical Archaeology Review, Smith's 1863 A Dictionary of the Bible, section #2.1, the Analytical Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon in its article. The second argument is supported on grammatical grounds because shortening to YHW would end up as Yahu or something similar, and forms like Yo contracted from Yeho and the suffix Yah, as well as Yeho or Yo, can most readily be explained as derivatives of Yahuwah rather than from Yehovah. Textual evidence. Meshestel, the oldest known inscription of the Tetragrammaton, dates to 840 BCE. On the Meshestel, it bears the earliest certain extra-biblical reference to the Israelite god Yahweh. The most recent discovery of a Tetragrammaton inscription, dating to the 6th century BCE, was found written in Hebrew on 2 silver scrolls recovered from Jerusalem. Scholarly texts of the Hebrew Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, the Tetragrammaton occurs 6,828 times, as can be seen in the Biblia Hebraica and Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia. In addition, on the margins there are notes indicating that in 134 places the Sophrim altered the original Hebrew text from YHWH to Adonai and 8 places to Elohim, which would add 142 occurrences to the initial number above. The occurrence of the divine name in Zechariah chapter 9 verse 4 in the YHWH fragment confirms these alterations. According to Brown Driver Briggs, occurs 6,518 times, and occurs 305 times in the Masoretic text. It first appears in Hebrew in the book of Genesis chapter 2 verse 4. The only books it does not appear in are Ecclesiastes, the Book of Esther, and Song of Songs. In the Book of Esther the Tetragrammaton does not appear, but it is present in 4 complex acrostics in Hebrew. The initial or last letters of 4 consecutive words, either forwards or backwards, comprise YHWH. These letters were distinguished in at least 3 ancient Hebrew manuscripts in red. Another acrostic containing the Tetragrammaton also composed the first 4 words of Psalm chapter 96 verse 11. Short form Jah occurs 50 times, 43 times in the Psalms, 1 in Exodus chapter 15 verse 2, 17-16, Isaiah chapter 12 verse 2, 26-4, and twice in Isaiah chapter 38 verse 11. In the Song of Songs 8-6 as a component expression Sala Abetevha, the flame of Jah. Jah appears in the abbreviated form Yah in the Greek word lambda, lambda eta, lambda omicron upsilon iota alpha in Revelation chapter 19 verses 1-6. God's name is also found in the Bible as a component in theophoric Hebrew names. Some may have had at the beginning of the form Jehovah Jeho and the other at the end Jahuah Jah. One name is a form of Yehweh as the second syllable onaj. Onomastic studies indicate that theophoric names containing the Tetragrammaton were very popular during the monarchy. The popular names with the prefix Jeho diminished, while the suffix Jah increased. The Septuagint typically translates YHWH as Kyrios Lord. Below are the number of occurrences of the Tetragrammaton in various books in the Masoretic text. Leningrad Codex. 6 Hebrew spellings of the Tetragrammaton are found in the Leningrad Codex of 1008 to 1010 as shown below. The entries in the close transcription column are not intended to indicate how the name was intended to be pronounced by the Masoretes, but only how the word would be pronounced if read without care perpetuum. Hataf Segel is the pronounced form of plain shva. The O diacritic dot over the letter waw is often omitted because it plays no useful role in distinguishing between the two intended pronunciations, Adonai and Elohim. Dead Sea Scrolls. In the Dead Sea Scrolls and other Hebrew and Aramaic texts, the Tetragrammaton and some other names of God in Judaism were sometimes written in Paleo-Hebrew script, showing that they were treated specially. Most of God's names were pronounced until about the 2nd century BC. Then, as a tradition of non-pronunciation of the names developed, alternatives for the Tetragrammaton appeared, such as Adonai, Kurios and Theos. The 4Q120, a Greek fragment of Leviticus discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls, has iota, alpha, omega, the Greek form of the Hebrew Tetragrammaton YHW. The historian John the Lydian wrote, "The Roman Varro defining him says that he is called Yahweh in the Chaldean Mysteries." The Van Kooten mentions that Yahweh is one of the specifically Jewish designations for God, and the Aramaic papyri from the Jews at Elephantine show that Yahweh is an original Jewish term. The preserved manuscripts from Qumran show the inconsistent practices of writing the Tetragrammaton, mainly in biblical quotations. In some manuscripts is written in Paleo-Hebrew script. Square scripts are replaced with 4 dots or dashes. The members of the Qumran community were aware of the existence of the Tetragrammaton, but this was not tantamount to granting consent for its existing use and speaking. This is evidenced not only by special treatment of the Tetragrammaton in the text, but by the recommendation recorded in the Rule of Association. Who will remember the most glorious name, which is above all? The table below presents all the manuscripts in which the Tetragrammaton is written in Paleo-Hebrew script, in square scripts, and all the manuscripts in which the copyists have used tetrapuncta. Copyists used the tetrapuncta apparently to warn against pronouncing the name of God. In the manuscript number 4Q248 is in the form of bars. The occurrence of the Tetragrammaton in some manuscripts at Qumran. The date of composition is an estimate according to Peter Machowski, as found in Commentaries to the Manuscripts of the Dead Sea by a Manual of Inscribal Practices and Approaches, reflected in the texts found in the Judean desert. The numbers on the horizontal line of the approximate year the manuscripts was produced. Magical papyri. The spellings of the Tetragrammaton occur among the many combinations and permutations of names of powerful agents that occur in Jewish magical papyri found in Egypt. One of these forms is the heptagram iota alpha omega omicron upsilon eta epsilon. In the Jewish magical papyri, IAVE and I alpha beta alpha Yabba occurs frequently. Yor is found in an Ethiopian Christian list of magical names of Jesus, purporting to have been taught by him to his disciples. Septuagint and other Greek translations. The oldest complete Septuagint versions, from around the 2nd century CE, consistently use kappa epsilon rho iota omicron sigma. sigma, or theta epsilon omicron sigma, where the Hebrew has YHWH, corresponding to substituting Adonai for YHWH in reading the original. The use of kappa epsilon rho iota omicron sigma for translating YHWH was not common in LXXMSS before that time. In books written in Greek in this period, as in the New Testament, kappa epsilon rho iota omicron sigma takes the place of the name of God. However, the oldest fragments had the Tetragrammaton in Hebrew or Paleo-Hebrew characters, with the exception of PRYL 458, where there are blank spaces, leading some scholars such as Colin Henderson Roberts to believe that it contained letters. According to Paul E. Carl, the Tetragrammaton must have been written in the manuscript where these breaks or blank spaces appear. Another one of these oldest fragments of manuscripts cannot be used in discussions because, in addition to its small text and its fragmentary condition, it does not include any Hebrew Bible verses where the Tetragrammaton appears. Throughout the Septuagint as now known, the word kappa epsilon rho iota omicron sigma without a definite article is used to represent the divine name, but it is uncertain whether this was the Septuagint's original rendering. Origen and Jerome said that in the time the best manuscripts gave not the word kappa epsilon rho iota omicron sigma but the Tetragrammaton itself written in an older form of the Hebrew characters. No Jewish manuscript of the Septuagint has been found with kappa epsilon rho iota omicron sigma representing the Tetragrammaton, and it has been argued, not altogether convincingly, that the use of the word kappa epsilon rho iota omicron sigma shows that the Septuagint as now known is of Christian character, and even that the composition of the New Testament preceded the change to kappa epsilon rho iota omicron sigma in the Septuagint. The use of kappa epsilon rho iota omicron sigma throughout to represent the Tetragrammaton has been called a distinguishing mark for any Christian. The 70th manuscript. In some earlier copies of the Septuagint, the Tetragrammaton in either Hebrew or Paleo-Hebrew letters is used. The Tetragrammaton occurs in the following texts. Papyrus Rylands 458 contains fragments of Deuteronomy, has blank spaces where the copyist probably had to write the Tetragrammaton. It has been dated to 2nd century BCE. Papyrus YHWH 266b contains fragments of Deuteronomy, chapters 10 to 33, dated to 1st century BCE. Apparently the first copyist left a blank space and marked with a dot and the other inscribed letters, but not all scholars agree to this view. Papyrus Oxyrhynchus 3522 contains chapter 42 of the Book of Job and the Tetragrammaton written in Paleo-Hebrew letters. It has been dated to the 1st century BCE. 8HGR, dated to the 1st century CE, includes 3 fragments published separately. Sh2GRXII has Tetragrammaton in 1 place, 8HGA in 24 places, whole or in part. 8HGB in 4 places. Papyrus Oxyrhynchus 5101 contains fragments of the Book of Psalms. It has been dated between year 50 and 150 CE. Fork-U Papalxlevs contains fragments of the Book of Leviticus, chapters 1 to 5. In 2 verses, 3:12, 4:27, the Tetragrammaton appears in the form iota alpha omega. This manuscript is dated to the 1st century BCE. Papyrus Oxyrhynchus 656 containing fragments of the Book of Genesis, chapters 14 to 27. A second copyist wrote Kyrios. It is dated to the late 2nd or early 3rd century CE. Papyrus Oxyrhynchus 1007. This manuscript in vitelliform contains Genesis chapter 2 and 3. The divine name is written with a double yud. It has been assigned paleographically to the 3rd century. Papyrus Berlin 17213 containing fragments of the Book of Genesis, chapter 19. Contains a blank space for the name of God apparently, although Emmanuel Tov thinks that it is a free space-ending paragraph. It has been dated to 3rd century CE. Taylor Schechter 16.320 Tetragrammaton in Hebrew, 556-49 CE. Codex Marcellanus has the divine name on marginal notes in Greek letters pi iota, and is the only another MSS with iota alpha omega. It is a 6th century Greek manuscript. Taylor Schechter 12.182 a hexapla manuscript with Tetragrammaton and Greek letters pi iota. It is from 7th century. Ambrosiano 039 Sa. The latest Greek manuscript containing the name of God is Origen's hexapla, transmitting among other translations the text of the Septuagint. This codex comes from the late 9th century, and is stored in the Bibliotheca Ambrosiana. In some earlier Greek copies of the Bible translated in the 2nd century CE by Symmachus and Aquila of Sinope, the Tetragrammaton occurs. The following manuscripts contain the divine name: Papyrus Vindobonensis Greek 39777, the p. Vindob. G.39777 dated to late 3rd century or beginning 4th century. Taylor. This is a Septuagint manuscript dated after the middle of the 5th century, but not later than the beginning of the 6th century. Burkitt. A palimpsest manuscript of the Septuagint dated late 5th century or early 6th century. Sidney Jellicoe concluded that Carl is right in holding that LXX texts, written by Jews for Jews, retained the divine name in Hebrew letters or in the Greek letters imitative form pi iota, and that its replacement by kappa upsilon rho iota omicron sigma was a Christian innovation. Jellicoe draws together evidence from a great many scholars and various segments of the Septuagint to draw the conclusions that the absence of Adonai from the text suggests that the insertion of the term Kyrios was a later practice. In the Septuagint, Kyrios is used to substitute YHWH, and the Tetragrammaton appeared in the original text, but Christian copyists removed it. Eusebius and Jerome used the hexapla. Both attest to the importance of the sacred name and that some manuscripts of Septuagint contained the Tetragrammaton in Hebrew letters. This is further affirmed by the New International Dictionary of New Testament Theology, which states, recently discovered texts doubt the idea that the translators of the LXX have rendered the Tetragrammaton YHWH with KYRIOS. The most ancient MSS of the LXX today available have the Tetragrammaton written in Hebrew letters in the Greek text. This was a custom preserved by the later Hebrew translator of the Old Testament in the 1st centuries. New Testament. No Greek manuscript of the New Testament uses the Tetragrammaton. In all its quotations of Old Testament texts that have the Tetragrammaton in Hebrew, the New Testament uses the Greek word kappa upsilon rho iota omicron sigma. However, within the New Testament, the name that the Tetragrammaton represents underlies the names of some of the people mentioned, and the name appears in the abbreviated form Yah in the Greek word lambda eta lambda omicron upsilon iota alpha in Revelation chapter 19 verses 1 to 6. In 1977, Professor George Howard in the pages of the Journal of Biblical Literature published a thesis of the presence of the Tetragrammaton in the biblical quotations cited by the writers of the New Testament. gives two sets of evidence. In some pre-Christian manuscripts of the Greek version of the Hebrew Bible was left Tetragrammaton containing the 12 prophets found in Nahil, Yehva, Ulxxlevb, and other Jewish translations of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, represented by translations of Aquila, Theodotion and Symmachus. Nomina sacra occurring in the early copies of the LXX in place of the Tetragrammaton, apparently created by the Christians of pagan origin. They knew Hebrew and it was difficult to them to save the Tetragrammaton, so they decided to use the shortened Kappa Sigma and Theta Sigma, conformable them in this way to the original spelling of the Tetragrammaton. It is not known whether and how this practice was influenced by the later Trinitarian debates. Patristic Writings according to the Catholic Encyclopedia and B.D. Edmonds, Diodorus Siculus writes Alpha. Irenaeus reports that the Gnostics formed a compound Alpha Omega Theta with the last syllable of Sabbath. He also reports that the Valentinian heretics use Alpha. Clement of Alexandria writes Alpha Omicron. See also below. Origen Alpha Omega. Porphyry according to Eusebius Epsilon Omega. Epiphanius, who was born in Palestine and spent a considerable part of his life there, gives Alpha and Alpha Beta Epsilon and explains Alpha Beta Epsilon as meaning he who was and is and always exists. Jerome can be read IHO. Theodore writes Alpha Omega. He also reports that the Samaritans say Alpha Beta Epsilon or Alpha Beta Alpha Iota, while the Jews say Iota Alpha. Jacob of Edessa, J.A. Jerome speaks of certain Greek writers who misunderstood the Hebrew letters as the Greek letters pi iota, thus changing YHWH to pp. Peshitta. The Peshitta, probably in the 2nd century, uses the word Lord for the Tetragrammaton. Vulgate. The Vulgate, made from the Hebrew in the 4th century AD, uses the word Lord for the Tetragrammaton. The Vulgate translation, though made not from the Septuagint but from the Hebrew text, did not depart from the practice used in the Septuagint. Thus, for most of its history, Christianity's translations of the Scriptures have used equivalents of Adonai to represent the Tetragrammaton. Only at about the beginning of the 16th century did Christian translations of the Bible appear with transliterations of the Tetragrammaton.